In this video, I want to talk about jQuery. jQuery is a JavaScript library that's known for greatly simplifying JavaScript programming, and it's used by a very high percentage of the top websites. It makes common actions in JavaScript, like DOM manipulation and setting up event handlers, much easier to perform, and it cuts down on a lot of the code length and just sort of boilerplate code that you've got if you're using vanilla JavaScript. So when we're using vanilla JavaScript, which is JavaScript without any library or framework, just plain JavaScript, we have to use these kinds of functions like document.getElementById to get access to these elements on the DOM and then modify the properties. And even just writing this out, that's a lot. Like that's a long function name there. And there's a lot of boilerplate there. If we want to modify multiple properties of an element, we either have to make multiple calls to this and modify each property individually, or we'd have to save a reference to the object returned by this and then modify those properties there. Either way, it's kind of cumbersome compared to how it could be. And we do have functions like this, document.querySelectorAll, that will give us a list of elements back based on a CSS selector. And these can be very useful. It makes it very much practical to manipulate a whole bunch of elements like this at once. But even with this, it's still a little cumbersome. We're still gonna have to loop through the results and work with them individually. And jQuery is a library that actually kind of simplifies this for us. And it just makes it easier and with a lot less boilerplate code to do these kinds of things. Now, one thing I should warn you about with jQuery is there's a bit of a movement to not use jQuery because technically speaking, it's not necessary. We don't need to use jQuery. It just makes things easier for us. It makes our code a little bit less boilerplatey, but there's a kind of a movement to not use it. So if you look up articles like on is jQuery still relevant, there's actually quite a number of people saying like, you shouldn't use it. It's not useful. Like don't use it. And there's a whole kind of website dedicated to, you might not really need jQuery. And they say, it's great, use it if you want to. But if you scroll down, they kind of explain all the ways where you don't really need jQuery to make your web application. So I wouldn't go as far as to say jQuery is on the way out or anything like that. It's used by, like a very high majority of the top 1% of websites. So it's still extremely popular because it does sort of make things easier for us. But you should be aware of that it's not really necessary. You don't need to use it. So if we want to use jQuery, we're going to have to go get it from somewhere because it's an external library. One of the easiest ways to get it is to just use the Google hosted libraries. And Google basically just keeps a copy of jQuery that anyone can just pull from and include. So if you just go here and go to jQuery, you can just get like version 3 of it. Then this will just be a external, URL that we can use to actually just pull in the jQuery library. And if you look at it in the browser, like what it actually looks like, this is a minified version of it. So it's going to look very condensed. They do that so that way it just transfers quicker over the web. If we look at the non-minified version of it, you can see what it looks like. And it's just sort of like a library of functionality that we can access and use. And like I said, the minified version, it's identical to this in terms of functionality, but it's been condensed as much as possible in terms of eliminating white space and stuff like that. So that way it transfers quicker over the web. So we've got this now, 3 point whatever version of jQuery included. Let's start testing it out. So the main thing with jQuery is the Jquery function, and it's just this. It's just $. And then we give an argument here, and the argument here is a selector. And we'll have to have something on the DOM to actually select. So let's just throw something on there. We'll put like an H1 tag. So we'll say like H1, and we'll say this is a title. And if we were to open this now, we'll get, this is a title. But we can use this jQuery function here to change that. So we'll say select any H1 tags and change the text inside of them to be this. And I'll just say like, this is a new title. And then we get, this is a new title. And so I can select any kind of elements in there. So I could say like H2, and I could say, this is a subtitle. And I could say H2, and I could say this is another subtitle. And I could change those as well. And I could say H2. And there's all kinds of methods that let us change these things. So if I were to say here .css, what this expects here is actually a object here with keys and values set to the CSS, attributes and the style attributes and the value for each attribute. So I could say like here, background color, aqua. And now I've got two H2 elements there, but I've changed their background color to aqua. And if I wanted to put in more stuff, I could just say color, red. And we'll get, red color there. I can stick HTML into the DOM. So if I had like a P element here and I wanted to put something with some HTML inside that P tag there, I could say p.html. And I could say like this contains a strong element. And then we run this, that'll actually render as a strong element. We can do some other stuff like grab values out of input text boxes and stick values in input text boxes. So if I've got like an input here and I say input ID is some input, type is text, put a break element there. Initially it'll contain nothing, but I could put something inside of it. So I could just say like $, and I'd say pound some input because it's just the same rules as CSS. And then I could say .val, and I could say put a value in the input text box. And then we'll get that value in there as well. I can also pull values from DOM elements as well. So like if I put an H3 tag here and I say like ID, some output here, then what I could do is I could take that value from the input box and put it in here. So I'd say like dot, and I'd say like text, and then I'd say $, some input .val. And then we'll get that value from there with this, and we take that and we put it in the H3 elements text. One thing that's pretty useful is the ability to add and remove classes one at a time. So if I were to have like a couple classes up here, and I'll just make them simple. I'll say like my class, and it'll just be, background color is pink. And then we'll have one more class where we're going to say my other class, and we'll say the color is green. What I can do is I can very easily add classes or add and remove classes to things. So if I were to say here $, and I'll just say H3 instead of, some input there. And I'll say add class, and then I'll say my class. And when I do that, it gives it a pink background. I could add multiple classes. So I could say like my other class, and then we get that other class added as well. And if I had multiple classes in there already and I just wanted to remove one, say like to remove a highlight because something has happened and I want to take out the highlight now, I could just take out one of the classes and now it'll remove that class. And so that's just a very nice way to manipulate classes one at a time or a few at a time and add and remove them. And with jQuery, what's great is all of this is like so concise. There's really no boilerplate whatsoever. It's just every sort of function and piece of information does something useful. One of the other cool things with jQuery that's another sort of space saver and time saver is you can chain these actions here together. So let's just say I've got a list here and I've got a few items in the list. So I'll say like first element, and then I'll make like a second, third, and fourth element. So one thing that's kind of cool is I can actually chain a bunch of these actions together. So instead of doing just one thing, I can do one thing, then another thing, then another thing, and all of those actions will take effect. So I'll say here like class is equal to list class. I'll do the same things here. I'll say class is equal to list class. And then I'm going to chain a bunch of actions together. So I'm going to say, okay, for those list class elements specifically, use some CSS. And maybe we'll just sort of look at what it looks like originally. So we've got this as of now. Let's just manipulate just these two here using that class. But I'll say, okay, make a CSS change the color to blue. But then I can just say dot and keep making changes. So I can say like HTML to changed, and then add class, my class. and I'll just keep chaining actions here. And you'll see that all three of those things happened. So I changed the color to blue, I changed the HTML to change, and then I added the class, my class, which then had the effect of changing the background color to pink. So all of those changes took effect, and we've got like really sort of one real line of code here. So it's just nice and efficient. It's just sort of very nice and easy to use. And that's why jQuery is extremely popular. Now, one other thing we can do with jQuery is set up event handlers. So let's just kind of go through that. Let's just blow away what's here. And then we'll set up some event handlers. So we're going to have something to click. So we'll give a button first. We'll say button ID is click me. And we'll say click me. And then down here, what I'm going to do is this. I'm actually going to say document, or say, sorry, I'm going to say $ document, and I'm going to say ready function, and I'm going to give a function here. So this here, this document.ready, this is common to see with jQuery. And what it's saying is run this code here inside this function when the document is finished loading. And the reason why we might put our event handlers in something like this is because then we're only going to be applying them to elements that have finished loading. So we're only going to be applying event handlers when we know the element is there. So that's what this is doing, is just ensuring that, you know, these things are going to be done after the document is finished loading. But what I'll say here is I'll say $, click me, and I'm going to say when it's been clicked, this function will handle it being clicked. And I'll have like an output here or something like that. So that way I can actually, output that something has been clicked. So I'll say output H2. And then I can just select that and I'll say $h2.html, and I'll say click me, or click the button. Okay. So if I click this here, I get click the button there. So then the other thing I could do is I could set up a handler for a whole bunch of things. So I could say like, okay, that's a handler for, you know, a button here, but I could have a bunch of H1 elements here. So I could say like H1, and I could say you could click me, and then I'll set up a few more. And what I can do is I can actually use jQuery and just set up a whole bunch of handlers at once for all of these. So I'll say like, or you could click me, or you could even click me, and I can set up a handler for all those at once. So I'll say here $, and I'll say, so for all the H1 elements, and maybe we'll make a double click. So I'll say DBL click, because that's the name of the action for this event here. And what I'll do is I'll say $, H2, HTML. I'll say you double clicked the H1 tag and H1 tag. So refresh this, so I can click on this, or I could click on this, or I could click on this. We get the same thing. And then there's all kinds of events. So you've got like hover events as well. So we could have like H3 element here, or a bunch of them, and we could say like try hovering over me. And we'll just copy this. So we've got all the usual events. So try hovering me, or try hovering over me, or even try hovering over me. So 3 H3 elements there. And in the case of hover, the way it works is kind of nice and efficient. So we just say .hover. We give a function here. And what it'll do is it'll apply this when the element is being hovered over. And if I want to select specifically, say the H3 element that's being hovered over, like that specific element, the keyword to use is this. So we do this, we say $ this, and what that'll let us do is select the specific H3 element that is being hovered over at that point. And then we could say like .css, and we could do our usual thing where we change something about it. So I'll say .css, and I'll set the background color to pink or whatever. So if I refresh this, if I hover over one of these now, they will actually go pink. All right, so that's the basics of using jQuery. If you want to know more, I'd suggest checking out the jQuery tutorial on W3 Schools.